The Duke of Wellington once said that all the business of war, and indeed all the business of life, is endeavouring to find out what you don't know by what you do. They are wise words, and whilst it may or may not be true of warfare, I'll bow to Wellington's expertise on that, I can confirm that it is definitely true of podcasting. Fans of the show will know that over the last 18 months, this podcast and I have been to hell and back again. A sabbatical for my mental health, Spotify disconnecting us from a third of our listeners, setting the show back some 18 months, and now a second debacle with distribution from Spotify to boot. The show has been through a seismic period of uncertainty, but has survived for one simple reason. This podcast was not built on sand. It was built on the ironclad will and unyielding, unbowed, and unbroken rock that is the Napoleonicist community. So, how do you resuscitate a podcast from a near-death experience? Well, Napoleon would have stormed into Spotify headquarters, evicted their board of directors, and installed himself as Lord High Podcaster. Murat, meanwhile, would have had a painting commissioned of himself, looking resplendent in ostrich feathers and skin-tight breeches. And as we've established before on this show, I have neither the thigh game nor the cheekbones for that. So instead, we're taking the Wellingtonian approach. Tonight, a new dawn breaks in the Napoleonic Wars pod, and a revolution in podcasting is underway. I introduce my new staff who will ride into podcasting battle alongside me, freshly trained in the art of wielding a microphone in anger and ready to do battle in the name of Napoleonic knowledge. We talk a doubling, yes, doubling, of the traditional podcasting output and a dizzying array of perks for patrons that will see the Napoleonic nerd community spring back with a vengeance, all while bumbling around in the usual cack-handed manner that you come to expect, despise, and frankly despair of when it comes to these State of the Union episodes. This is the State of the Union, the Vendee. Up next on the Napoleonic Wars pod.
Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of the Napoleonic Wars podcast. This is not Zack White. Your ears are not deceiving you. He is tied and gagged in the corner, but that's just what he likes. He's into punishment. You know how it is. I'm Luke Reynolds, and no, I do have Zack here, but I also have two other very special people here, because this is the State of the Union 3, the Vendee. And we're doing an exponential growth thing here, much like the Napoleonic Wars in general. God knows where we're going to be by State of the Union 8. Presumably we'll be marching on Moscow. Although in today's political climate, that might be a little dodgy. Let's go with we're going to be occupying the Waterloo Station instead. That's much safer.
I mean, I'm glad you didn't go with, like, we'll be burning down the White House, because, again, in the current political climate, that would be problematic.
No. Thank you. I'd rather not end up on any lists, please. With the possible exception of the Journal of Army Historical Research Christmas reading lists. You can put me on that one. That's fine. But any other lists I'd prefer to stay off of. So yes, we are here. We have new members. We have new team members. We have new perks. Zack even got a haircut. It's all very exciting. We're really just we're starting almost fresh, and in order to really explain why, we're going to hand over to Zack. But before we do, we're going to hand over to Zack for an even more important reason, and that is so that he can introduce two more team members who can talk over him, who can take the piss out of him, and who can generally treat him in the manner not only to which he has become accustomed, but to which he secretly enjoys. So, Dr. White, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reynolds. It's always such a joy to spend time with you. I probably should retake that and say it with more enthusiasm, but the undertones are hopefully indicative of my feeling here.
Zack, we've made a career. Actually, you have made a career on this podcast of providing the unvarnished truth. Why start lying now?
Well, not if you listen to everybody, because some people turn around and go, oh, he's too anti-Bonapartist. He must be wrong, because people have their opinions.
I
Um,
enjoyed the one who called you, what was it, like a traditional upper class public school boy?
oh, yes, that we'll get into that later,
Oh,
actually.
good.
Yes. I'd forgotten about that one, actually. But there's been this
Mm.
whole kind of thing of me sort of trying to put things out there, gripping an algorithm, and the second you grip an algorithm, the trolls descend from their mountaintop. It's like somebody kind of blows a silent horn, and suddenly they all assemble. But yeah, we'll get to that. But yes, the kid who grew up on a council estate apparently is a middle class public school boy twat. I'm not sure that individual was coming for a reasoned discussion about the nature of historical memory when it comes to Waterloo.
I mean, 1 out of 3 isn't bad, Zach.
But you say that as if you're the only one who has the ability to A, dish it out, but also um, take it, because we have two competitors for your crown as heckler in chief. You are about to be dethroned. Now, one of these voices, folks will be very familiar with, hopefully, because not only is he a friend of the show, and also somebody who's been on at least once, possibly twice before, um, but he's also going to star in some future video content. We are very delighted
Are
to
we finally
welcome.
getting an OnlyFans?
God's sake, can you please stop lowering the tone, Reynolds? Um, I won't lie. There have been discussions in the group chat about whether or not a history only fans was a viable concept, not specifically Napoleonic, but just like history only fans in general. And the consensus was it's probably a little bit too niche to make it fly. If you don't know what OnlyFans is, my recommendation is that you do not go and Google it. Otherwise, you're going to have some serious explaining to do when it comes to your better half checking your search history. Um, but no, Liam is, as some of you will know, a reenactor. Liam Telfer, former corporal of horse, no less, in the household cavalry. Um, Many of you will remember him from Waterloo Live, which myself and Luke did, well, over a year ago now. And
Mm.
that was very much his kind of, we didn't kind of realize this at the time, but it basically became the dummy run for can we make this work as a multi presenter thing, even though that was done for NRWGC. Um, Liam is no longer with the Household Cavalry. He's now a firefighter. So going from one highly respectable job to another highly respectable job, and putting us history nerds who make money out of going into dusty archives and finding niche little facts that no one gives a stuff about to absolute shame. Liam's a reenactor, though, with the 44th East Essex, and it's in that capacity that he'll be appearing in some videos shortly when we discuss whether or not it's possible to fire 4 rounds a minute. Spoiler alert, the answer is maybe. So on that tantalizing kind of prospect, Liam, welcome to the show. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm very well, thank you. And great to see you guys. Feels a little bit like getting the band back together from Waterloo Live with the addition of one more. I won't steal your thunder on that. But yes, honored to be here. Thank you very much for having me. And I really look forward to deep diving some nerdery with you guys.
It is all about the Napoleonic nerdery, and I won't lie, we've been looking at rebranding, and we did consider the tagline the home of the Napoleonic nerdery. Um, we'll say more about merch in due course, because I have suspicions about why Liam is dragging us towards the you're having merch. But we'll get into that later. As you are hearing, there is a second new arrival to the team. We are very fortunate to be joined by a young man who I describe as one of the most ambitious people I've possibly ever met within the field of Napoleonic history, because this guy as a second year undergraduate, decided to write to somebody who's doing a Leverhulme fellowship. Now, to me, the idea of, oh, I've got a Leverhulme fellowship, I'm like, well, it's just like jokes and magic and long fancy words. But if you're an undergraduate writing to somebody who's doing a fellowship at university, you kind of think that they've made it and that they are somebody. It's absolute nonsense and smoke and mirrors. But nonetheless, because that perception is there, it takes balls to do it. So Josh Reddens decided to write to me and said, look, can I like have a job, basically. Initially within the context of the Napoleonic and Revolutionary War Graves charity, and then having sort of done his internship, if you like, on that, said, but look, I want more. I want to do a master's. I might want to do a PhD. I want to fill the CV. Is there more to be had? So I said, well, you can help on the podcast if you want. And he went, yes. So, ladies and gents, please welcome to the show, Josh Redden. Josh, great to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you, Zach. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for that very flattering introduction. Yeah, you're right with what you say about like the intimidating aspect of like speaking to your to lecturers and professors and academics. And I feel like ever since I've met you, it's just been a process of peeling back that veneer of like professionalism. We've just been going through the motions almost of seeing that we're not too different really, and academics have senses of humor, and are just nerds at the end of the day. They're nerds with letters. So
They are absolutely that, nerds with letters. We should get that on a t-shirt. Liam, make a note. Um, and he promptly dives for the pen. Yeah, I like that it's been about peeling back the layers of professionalism rather than like peeling back the layers of, I don't know, intellectual rigor or into, professorial hierarchy. No, it's just realizing that um we aren't particularly professional on this show, and that penny has dropped with a resounding clang. Um, I would like to blame that on Luke, but in reality, I think we're as bad as each other on that score.
I have to say, and I think Liam went through this a little bit at Waterloo Live as well. Josh, you're just the latest into this. But I peeling back the curtain a little bit, and I mean no offense to Liam when I say this, but in the planning for Waterloo Live, there were a couple of comments about sort of, well, you two are the academics. I'll just follow your lead. And then about halfway through Waterloo Live, he just got this look on his face of like, why am I trapped in this room with two giggling idiots? While he's like, we're there teasing and joking with each other while he's conducting superb interviews with other scholars. And there was just this moment of, oh God, they are all right. Yeah, the books only contain a little bit of them.
There was this distinct moment where we got a certain look, which was, I imagine, what his children get when they're being particularly raucous and they really need to go to bed. And it said everything. And it was something along the line. It didn't say a word, but it was absolutely that kind of thing of, can you shut the bloody hell up, please? Because I'm trying to do some like professional work stuff here.
I think it got to the point where it was almost like some kind of historical crystal maze. And I had to sort of work my way past like two jesters to win some fast food at the end. Um, but no, it was a cracking day. I think we all started to become a little unhinged as we went.
12 hours on air will do that to you. But yes, we did end the day at McDonald's, as all highbrow Napoleonic shows should.
I
Um,
mean, the problem is the logical thing is to end up at the pub, but none of us drink.
well, it was worse than that. The pubs were shut. Like, who shuts a pub at 10 o'clock on a weekday? Apparently, everybody in Southampton.
I mean, it's
Which,
Southampton.
well, yes. I mean, but it's meant to be a university city. Like, what are all the students doing? If that, Josh, you can answer this. What are all the students doing if they're not going out and getting pissed before their 9 a.m. lecture?
I don't know what they're doing in Southampton. I think they should up their game maybe, but I mean, yeah, they should be working a bit harder, I think.
We now come to a point, I guess, where having introduced everybody, we should probably start having like shorthands for each other. Um, there was never any point with this for Luke because He was just the other one. So, it was more kind of along the lines of oi, you. Because we keep things like polite in our group chats. But now that's not the case. And I've been mulling this over and trying to work out what I think we should each be termed. I have dropped some hints. Clearly, I'm not allowed to be Emperor of the Napoleonic Wars pod because I think our patron, Todd Campbell, wants the title of Emperor for himself. So that one's clearly off the books. When it comes to Liam, I kind of wanted to make you quartermaster because of all of the merch stuff. But the trouble with that is that if I do that, it basically makes you an officer. And there is, that is probably the most grievous insult that you could possibly offer Liam is to make him an officer, which is ironic because it'd actually make a cracking officer because it'd actually do some stuff and lead by example and all the rest of it. But yeah, Liam, I'm struggling. I don't want to just call you Corporal of Horse all of the time. But I'm struggling for a better title.
Corporal Punishment.
I think quartermaster would work in some ways because certainly during our period, and it maintains it today, a lot of the quartermasters are late entries. So they will have served 22, 24 years in the ranks and then been promoted and taken on the role of quartermaster. So it could work if that's what you if that's what's been thrown at the wall and sticks. I don't mind.
I mean, I will say, Liam, your work in merchandising already sort of lends the title of quartermaster automatically. You seem to be sort of chasing that position. It's sort of, yeah. I think quartermaster might be the way to go, given that Liam is open to the rank or the title. It's certainly not something you'd want to put on someone who didn't want it. But in this case, I think it might be the way to go.
I mean, if ever there was a forlorn hope in which to earn a promotion, this podcast has got to be up there, right? So we'll go with it. All right then. So Liam is clearly now quartermaster of the Napoleonic Wars pod. Luke, you've already got about 15,000 titles. I've lost track of what you're calling yourself at this stage. I wouldn't be surprised if you're now sort of assistant deputy co-director in chief. So we'll move on from you. Josh, now this is difficult because you're currently working on a summer camp, and
I am.
My heart goes out to you when you take us through some of the duties that you have to perform. Not least in relation to sort of ensuring that there aren't any dalliances, shall we say, between different members of the camp. And I kind of want to have some kind of military police kind of related role for all of the crowd control basically that you're having to do. And I don't know if that means we make you the provost marshal. I don't know how you feel about that one.
I like that title. Yeah, I think that's very suitable given what I'm doing at the moment, which, as you say, is glorified stewardship with teenagers, hormonal teenagers going to Friday night discos and who need to be separated at the end of the night. Very glamorous job. So yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I do not envy you that at all. A colleague of mine when I was working in secondary schools took a bunch of year 10s, which for folks who don't know the non-UK system, that's kind of like 15-year-olds on a field trip to Germany as part of their World War II history program. And there were very clear and very strict rules on, the boys' bedroom is the boys' bedroom, the girls' bedroom is the girls' bedroom, and never will the two mix. Dear listener, it was not that simple, trust me. So I feel for you immensely in that role. Okay, so you are Provost Marshal Redden. That is now locked in. We haven't got round to my name, but frankly, Luke will chime in and it'll be something rude, and we don't need to put our listeners through that, do we?
I was sort of hanging on to something you said earlier about all the sort of magic and wizardry that goes on inside universities. And never having went to university, it sort of sprung to mind somewhere like Hogwarts. And then the sudden resemblance between yourself and the boy who lived is stuck in my mind.
Is that what we're calling me, the boy who lived?
I think that might get us sued.
Yeah, that's true.
That's true. Actually, JK might be on the phone. Um, yes, I mean, I did live through the terrible time of the Spotify nonsense.
Mhm.
So maybe there is it really doesn't equate to, the trauma that opens the Harry Potter books, quite obviously. Um,
I think you've nailed it already, Zach. You referred to it as the podcast title, but I think it's yours. I think it's Forlorn Hope.
I knew he'd come up with something smart. He's always got to be a smart ass, hasn't he?
The
I
sad thing is, he's genuinely so clever that it puts us in the shade, really.
Well, he likes to think he's clever. He's a good wordsmith. I'll say that for him.
I mean, it is what it is, and the praise from one's colleagues is the sweetest one can achieve. Um, Forlorn Hope White.
Oh, you want me to respond to that name, do
No,
you?
no, 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 no. I
No.
was just throwing it out as like the full title. No, I'm not going to start calling you that. I think I'm going to stick with the OU, honestly. Uh,
It does open up another sort of personalized merch opportunity for a sort of Valiant Stormer badge on anything that Zack has.
I like that idea. I really do. Give him the give him the laurel wreath. I mean, the thing you have to remember about Zack is because this was a one-man show for so long, he was the generally so supremo Banana Republic general, but he was also at the same time the General Dog's body. He was both the Blackadder and the Baldric.
If you start calling me Baldric, I will cut how much I am paying you by 5%.
I would not dream of insulting Sir Tony Robinson in that way.
Mix the two up and go with Balladder.
Is it
Ball
who is it in the series that calls him Bladder? Abbreviates Blackadder to Bladder or
I forget.
Bladders?
I forget. But at this stage, all I have in my head is Stephen Fry as Wellington just bellowing tea at everybody.
You can do worse with images of both the era and Britain in general. Although, I mean, it doesn't have to be, it genuinely does not have to be Napoleonic. Because Zach has another love, which is Airfix models and a fondness for World War II aircraft. So we could just call him Flight Commander. He's desperately got to, try and control three other giggling idiots, thankfully not armed with machine guns at the time, but, there is something to be said for that sort of thing. But this brings up another question. Zach, we've all had fun with this. We've all been laughing. You've already complained several times about your decision, which inevitably there is a question here, which is why? Why have you inflicted us, not only on you and you on us, but all of us on your poor listeners, some of whom pay for the privilege?
I mean, I can just imagine the complaints are probably flooding in, not literally as we speak, but almost as we speak. Do you know what I mean? This podcast, that you can just imagine the reviews. This podcast has dropped in quality, which is strange because that would imply that it had some quality when it started. I won't lie, it's all a reaction to the Spotify debacle. And I don't want to spend a long time kind of dwelling on it and kind of playing the world's smallest violin. But it was one of those crossroads moments, right? There was either a decision had to be made, either to rebuild and work hard to kind of build it back and pause and reflect, or to just let it die. And actually, Liam was basically texting me on an hourly basis saying, "You're not bloody giving up because I won't let you." Uh, he says, nodding sagely. Um, so it's very much a reaction to that, and just sometimes these moments are good opportunities to just sort of stop and reflect and think, okay, we've had that. Do we just carry on as we were? Do we try and do more of the same? Do we, to use a kind of hackneyed British political slogan, build back better? Um, or do we just kind of let it go? And it was amazing actually to see the response from the listeners, and I can't thank everybody enough, because the outpouring of genuine anger in some cases, but a huge amount of love for the show was just incredible. We've got to a point now where there are more reviews for this show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts than there ever were. It's so from a situation where we lost more than half of our reviews, we've gone to a point where we've, blown it out of the park. And of course, because it was kind of one of those situations of pity, everybody was leaving 5-star reviews of the show, which therefore meant our overall average crept up. So I really can't thank the listeners enough for everything that they did with that. And some of the reviews were just hilarious. One of my favorite was an individual who I won't embarrass by name, but they described the podcast as a Napoleonic nerdgasm, which I thought was a novel way of expressing it. I don't often hear the show described quite like that.
I think perhaps if there are many metaphors you could use for like what the podcast went through from our period, but the one I might use to compare it to is maybe like the push and defeat of 1806 in terms of like the comprehensive like crushing of a state, which they nevertheless use as an opportunity to build back and hopefully in the future become kind of a supremo in the European like theatre in the 19th century. So that's my metaphor I choose to describe what happened to the podcast.
That's not a bad metaphor, actually. This was our Jena.
I
what I'm
really
going
like
for.
that. Yeah, I do. And I think there's something to be said for Prussia in 1806. There's something to be said for any country that is summarily defeated and thinks, you know what we need? More universities. In this case, just more general Napoleonic education. I like that.
Yeah, so I mean that's where it's come from. And I mean, folks probably need. This is the point where we should get to the point, right, and start to talk about the future,
I'm
because,
sorry, we have a point.
well, in theory, the reality is something else. But that's something that you guys are all tasked with, like making there be an actual point to this. But
Mm.
in all seriousness, like, what is the vision for the future? Why bring together a team? The impetus behind it, but what's the vision for the future? And the vision is multifaceted. One of the big things that I really wanted to do was to sort of hunker down and make sure that we not only keep producing, but that we're producing with variety, but also focusing on what I've always said is the beating heart of this show, which is the fan base, right? The only reason this show continues is because the fans basically decree that it will be so. And there are enough people who will be naffed off if we stopped production that I've kind of gone, well, we better keep on going with it. Um, and folks will notice that I've gone quite a little bit whilst we've been doing this sort of restructure, but there is firstly a vision for more. And that's the most immediate change that folks will see. We will be producing much, much more in the way of content. Absolute minimum of 1 episode a week, but with a vision of 2 long form episodes a week. And you'll notice there that I said long form episodes, because there is also something that we're working on, which is smaller episodes, mini episodes, what I'm calling character profiles, where we take figures from the length and breadth of the Napoleonic era and do short kind of dives into their life. Because I'm very conscious, and this was actually something that Luke put me onto, because he mentioned some people just off the cuff in conversation with me, and I was kind of like, I don't know who those people are. I'm going to have to look those up before I reply to him so that I can say something that seemingly is intelligent. I attempt to maintain that veneer. I'm never successful in doing so, but and it made me realize that actually we do this a lot as historians. We just kind of drop terms or names as if they mean something to people, and actually sometimes they don't. Like, you may genuinely not have a clue who Talleyrand was, and you shouldn't be kind of laughed out of the auditorium, or kind of push the side of the show because you don't know who these people are, because that's part of the learning experience. And also, if you like kind of pod bites, which is what Josh Proven keeps referring to this concept as, then you'll quite like that. And it's something a little bit different. So we're going to experiment with that. And the vision is to have at least one of those a week, possibly two as well. So effectively, you're looking at up to 4 episodes in a week. And that's just the beginning, because we are also restructuring the entire Patreon offering. So exclusive content is back. 2 of the long form episodes that we do each month will be absolutely exclusive to our Patreon listeners. And so, if you sign up for the lowest tier of perk, then straight away you get that. We're also going to commit to a definite ad-free access via Patreon. Quite what folks are getting through the other channels now, I'm not sure, having jumped from ads and then back to ads and then non-ads, and then it's all a bit of a mess. So if you are getting ads, I'm sorry, not least because I'm not actually getting paid for those ads that are slapped on the podcast anymore. So I'm really sorry about that. But yeah, so you'll also get the exclusive content. You'll get the ad-free access, and you'll get the early access as well to every single episode, regardless of whether it's unique or not. Then we're also going to keep with the shout outs, the kind of mentioned in dispatches tier of old. And then the admirals concept as it currently is, the idea that you have these monthly meetups will continue, but there's going to be a twist. And this is Luke's moment of genius. Yes, he had a moment of genius. They do happen occasionally, which was that we should do a kind of book club. And we had a chat with the patrons and discussed, what would you like and how would this work for you? And the consensus was monthly book club would be too much, because you've got to get the book, you've got to read it, you've got to prep what you're going to say. That's quite a lot of expenditure on top of being part of that level of membership. So we've decided to just kind of tweak the concept slightly. So every 3rd month will be a book club. We will let you know well in advance. Where possible, we will try and get you discounts on that title. And where possible, we will also do an author interview that is dedicated to the forthcoming installment of that book club. So there's a lot of planning that has to go into that tier. And you will only get access to that exclusive interview if you're in that tier. So if you sign up for that tier, you not only get the 2 bonus exclusive episodes that go out to all patrons, you also get access to the interview with the author. But there's more. Are you excited yet, people? Because at the next tier up, you get to kind of enjoy a meet the author experience. Now, this isn't tied necessarily to the book club. Sometimes we'll make sure that there's a crossover between the two. But each month, we will be picking a historian and giving you the chance to not only attend an exclusive interview with them, but also put your own questions to them. Those of you who can't make the meeting get the audio interview, but there's more. Because at the next tier up, you get all of what I've just talked about, but you also get green room access. Now, some people are going, what the hell is a green room access pass thing? This basically means you get to attend 2 of the recordings each month. Now, which 2 will be dependent on guest availability and willingness. So it might mean that you end up sitting in a State of the Union episode, which may not be something that you want to attend.
We are so sorry. We would just like to apologize in advance for all of this.
Maybe we could make it one of the perks that you get a signed, kind of condolences card for the horrific experience that you will endure
I
in
like that
particular
idea.
tier. Maybe we should make
Yeah.
that a perk.
The apology tier.
Indeed. But the idea, in all seriousness, is that it gives you the chance to meet the author in an entirely different sense. I'm always very conscious that folks will have their own questions. I can craft my questions, and people may or may not think that they're worthwhile, but you have your own questions that you might want to put to the guest. So there's your chance. And then there's a tier above that where basically you get everything. Well, not quite everything, because I can't afford to buy David's Napoleon's coronation painting. So you get almost everything. And basically, um, we within that will give you everything that you've heard about, but every other month there is going to be an exclusive online course. Yes, the course is making a return, and Dr. Reynolds and myself will basically give you the full seminar experience, but not in a kind of intimidating, have you done the reading? Why haven't you done the reading? Kind of experience that university students usually endure because they've spent a night on the town. This will be much more of a kind of let's have a well-informed chat, and we'll have read it and we'll kind of have thought about some big themes that come out of it, and we'll kind of talk through all of that through the course of that session. So there's a lot in there. In terms of the prices, because there is so much more going into this, the prices are going up. Sorry, folks. So the bottom tier is £2 a month, bearing in mind that you're getting 2 exclusive episodes for that, so £1 per episode. Mentioned in dispatches will now be £4 a month. The socials 8, but bear in mind that you are getting that dedicated interview. So, you know, there's more going into that. £15 a month for the Meet the Author experience, 21 for the green room access, and then 40 for the course. And the way to think about this is how much more are you paying for the individual things that you get. So, for example, when it comes to the course, you might think £40, that's awfully steep. And yes, it absolutely is, folks. I'm very sorry. But it's effectively the case that you're paying £19 for the course, and then you're paying the additional, the remaining £21 for all of the other perks that you get in the other tiers. So that's the way to think about it. So I hope that that's of interest to people. People might be sort of thinking, well, why don't you just give all of that away for free? I did have somebody the day who kind of turned around to me and said, you know, you should consider all of this an investment. And I was kind of thinking, yeah, but pal, I bought a drone for about 600 quid. I bought a vlogging camera for about 700 quid. I bought mounts and state of the art microphones and all of these other things. And basically, I've spent thousands of pounds investing in all of this. So, you know, there is investment in the show. It doesn't happen by magic. But now, of course, I have mouths to feed. I am the owner of a business. And it's important that my employees get their cut, because everybody in the room on this show is getting a cut of the proceeds. It's not as though I am I don't know, Messena, just kind of looting all of your wallets and keeping it all for myself. I am disseminating that loot amongst my fellow co-hosts. Pity, for example, Liam, who spends so much time using black powder that, frankly, I reckon it's probably an addiction. And you know, you need to assist Liam in recovering from that black powder addiction. I will neither confirm nor deny whether or not he may spend his takings from this podcast on buying more black powder. You can judge for yourself whether you are feeding that addiction or helping him wean himself off of it. So you know, pity Liam. He needs to practice his musket drill to perfect that 4 rounds a minute. That's what you're investing in on this show. You've got Josh, who's a university student. Like for £2 a month, you can make sure that one night a week, Josh doesn't have to eat beans out of a tin from his university flat. There you go. Have I guilt tripped you enough into this yet? And Luke, I don't know what Luke's vice is. Port, maybe? I want to say that Luke has many vices, but even I know that that's taking it a little bit too far, except that I've just said it anyway.
Look, mate, the port is one thing, but do you know the price of good English wool and fine European silk these days?
Ever the dandy. That's going to be your nickname now. We're going to call you the Bow. There you
I'm
go.
fine with that. I'm absolutely fine with that.
I have given you a Wellingtonian nickname, no less. So
The
Reynolds
honor.
the Bow.
That is perfect.
I appreciate that. I mean, and also on the perk side, we joke all the time about how awful it is to listen to us. And I mean, that is, if you continue that to the end, this is great. If you spend no money, you get 2 episodes a month less that you don't have to listen to. But also, we're gonna do some good stuff, right? There's gonna be a meet the author level with me that's gonna go out to everybody because I can donate my time that way. Because all of you are not utterly sick of hearing about my book already. Um, so we'll do stuff like that. And there are gonna be, you guys haven't seen the group chat, but I wake up every morning because I'm in the United States, which means that I'm 5 hours jinked off of everybody. And I wake up to 30 or 40 brilliant ideas in text. Actually, no, that's a lie. I wake up to about 20 brilliant ideas and 20 dick jokes in response to them um, each morning. But those 20 are still damn good. And I think there's going to be a lot of really remarkable stuff here. Some of it is going to be just taking what this podcast already does really well and doing it even better. And Zach, I know you made that joke about, quality improving and, there was never quality to begin with, but you need to be fair to yourself. The audio quality has improved tremendously.
There is that. Somebody advised me on appropriate microphones. We for all of my thing about Uncle Jeff and don't go and help Jeff Bezos spend all of your money on rocket fuel, I may have been guilty in making sure that everybody bought very high quality microphones through Amazon. Um, so I have been guilty of breaking my own rules on all of this. But yes, thank you for that. The audio quality has improved. Not least because we got complaints in the past. But I mean, you talk about good ideas. I would say about half of those good ideas are usually Liam going, I've had
Yes.
another merch idea.
Yes, they are.
Which which is pretty much how it's going. My theory on this is that Liam has decided that he needs a new wardrobe, and yet his wife has drawn the line with the idea that he will now solely wear Georgian clothing, and so he's looking for an alternative, and that alternative is to just turn himself into a walking billboard for the podcast. And so I think the reason that we're getting all of these suggestions about what about hoodies and what about shirts and t-shirts and what about branded shorts and all the rest of it is I need a new wardrobe. Make it so because he wants his producer's discount on that clothing range. That's are you able to confirm it? Is that the have I just cracked it, Liam? Is that what it's all about?
I am an utter swag queen when it comes to things with the badge on. And obviously, as you guys know, we've got that sort of very exciting unveiling to come with the new branding for the show, and people will be able to see that on the merchandise as well. But it's a really exciting sort of step in giving people the opportunity to represent the podcast and to advertise as well. And yes, I will be advertising a lot. You've got to have samples, right? I've got to make sure that the stuff that people are going to buy is quality, and yeah. So I'm just looking after the listeners, really.
The fact is also we could charge twice for the merchandise that we're going to, and it would still be cheap compared to reenacting clothing.
That is a fact.
That's the way to persuade your wife that you need to invest in all of this. Like, at least I'm not buying like period breeches because they would be far more expensive than these, I don't know, shorts or whatever it is that your latest idea is. I must admit the energy with which you've gone after this has been remarkable. There have been moments where I have absolutely reached for the Braveheart gif where he's just going, hold, hold. Um, it's a shame that we don't have a Napoleon equivalent of that, like hold the line. But
I mean, I never listened to the recall, so
you're a cavalryman, it's not
exactly,
in your nature.
exactly. I will continue to charge at things. And I sort of see it as you, Zach, and Josh and Luke's responsibility to just try and recall me.
That's completely fair. We could get a gif of the knuckle tattoos from Master and Commander, the hold fast.
That
That's a good
works.
idea. I was
That
thinking
works.
of where have I heard hold before? It's Master and
Mm,
Commander.
yeah.
There you go. There you go. We do need to see the thing about Master and Commander, of course, is it's copyrighted, so we can't really do a live watch along and reaction video, which is a shame. Mind you, if we did that, it would basically just be me fangirling the whole way through about the film and why it's superb and how it's a travesty that we have Gladiator 2, but not Master and Commander 27. Like that's where I'm going
Mm,
And
that
with
five
is,
Pirates of the Caribbean films.
I know, but just well, that is the problem that it
I
came out.
know.
I know I've said this on the podcast before, but that is the problem. It came out the same year as Pirates, and everybody had their boaty fix for
yeah,
that year.
no, it's true. I'm just sad we didn't get the Gladiator sequel that was mooted. There was a script going around for one that would actually involve Russell Crowe fighting his way out of the underworld.
Oh, that's clever though.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's the reason that we didn't get that one. I must
Mm,
admit, I did chuckle to myself when all of the new generation, let's say, of Roman historians started commenting on that trailer. And the number of times that I reached for another GIF, which is that first time. One, folks who are in the sort of
yep.
meme world will know what I'm referring to, because of course, I must admit, this time I haven't got a dog in the fight, right? So it's not my period. I'm not really fussed. I'm just expecting it to be a a romp, basically, and there'll be lots of battle scenes, and that will be fun, kind of thing. Um, but I think it will actually work better because it's not based on a real figure, so there's no story. You can make up the story this time, Ridley, and that's okay. Sorry, we've gone down one of the areas that I've had complaints about because apparently I talk too much about the Napoleon movie on this show.
It's a
One thing I
once in a
will,
lifetime event for us, though. Napoleon film coming out. Well, that's not going to happen now for another 100 years.
well, it definitely won't now because Ridley did such a shit job about it. Sorry, I said I'd stop that, didn't I? Uh,
He's not better at all.
not even remotely. Um, One thing I do actually want to just get the listeners' view on, though, isn't the Napoleon movie, but it is the length of episodes. He says, having just had a glance at the timestamp for this one and realized that we've done like the first major item, but not the others. Um, and that's like length of episodes because I was discussing this with patrons, and there are two schools of thought on this. One is that cut the episodes shorter, i.e., rip out content from the discussions, and control the interview in such a way that podcasts are limited to 60 minutes, and that is the industry standard. There is a body of research that says that after 60 minutes, people get bored. People generally listen to pods on their commute to work, and if it goes on beyond that, they don't listen to the rest. So I have experimented in the past with just splitting the episode. And so you have a part one and a part two. And what I've always found is that the part two does somewhere in the region of a quarter to a third less well than part one. And so I've been in two minds because, in one sense, you can exploit that to get all of the additional downloads from episode two, the second part, that ordinarily would just be a continuation of listening to episode one. But I've never kind of entirely liked that. And at the same time, I haven't liked the idea of being concise because I don't understand what that concept is. And on a more serious level, the part of what this show does is the deep dive. That's one of the things that people commented on in the reviews, is that we just go to hell with the stopwatch. We just go into this and we go for a long time. And at the end of it, you'll have learned some serious stuff. So in one sense, there's that kind of sense of jeopardy of, do we lose our USP if we cut things short? Because the other way to argue about long episodes is to say, well, if you're bored, then fair, understand why you wouldn't want to listen to the rest. And you're probably one of those people who's not coming back for part two. But if you're not bored, you can hit pause on your podcast player of choice. And if it's on your phone or on most of the computer programs these days, it will remember where you are. So you can just hit play again and pick it up where you left off. So I genuinely don't know which way to go on this. This is a dangerous moment because I am opening it up to a democratic process. Unlike Napoleon, I'm not going to rig this vote and inflate the numbers. But I won't confirm whether or not I'll abide by the results of this poll, as Elon proclaimed on Twitter. But genuinely, folks, please let me know. We do and are going to pay a lot of attention to people's comments. There is a dedicated kind of question that I can attach, certainly on Spotify. I'm not sure if it really goes out on Apple, but let us know what you think in terms of that length, and I will have a ponder on how we mold things going forwards. Equally, if you have thoughts on episodes that you'd like to see, let us know. We'll have a think about it, see if it's viable. If it's not, then we won't do it. If it is, and we can find an expert, we might see about getting somebody on to talk about that. So that's all about that. Folks, have you got any kind of things you want to chip in on that?
Just while you are appealing to our wonderful listeners, one of the things I wanted to sort of ask as well, we are obviously, like we've mentioned, creating a new sort of merchandise, various lines of merchandise, and I think it's really important, as with all things in this show, we sort of listen to the listeners and give the people what they want. And if anyone has any particular desires or fancies of a piece of equipment with some spanking new Napoleonic Wars podcast branding on, we'd love to hear from you.
There is also a really nice point that we could personalize merch. Like if you want your name on the back of a Napoleonic Wars pod hoodie, we can probably offer that. It will have to go and do a dedicated design for you, so it won't be the same price as the generic design. But if you want your name emblazoned, like we can do like a whole title thing. You know, you tell us what you want on the back of your hoodie. We can probably make that. Well, Liam can probably make that so. That's the role of the quartermaster, is to supply you with your merchandise desires. So yeah, let us know one way or another, and we will see what we can do on that score.
Absolutely. I remember NRWGC randomly found themselves with about 500 weatherproof stickers of their logo because Liam wanted one for his truck. And suddenly we had stickers because Liam wanted one.
Do you know what? They sold pretty well though.
They did sell pretty well.
They are the most consistent seller out of the charity merch.
Yeah. So that brings us to a different question. You know, Liam, when are you doing an entire Napoleonic Wars car?
a Napoleonic Wars car.
Or is that just a horse?
Exactly. Exactly. It's a horse and a wagon. You won't be surprised to hear it's actually something that I've looked into in terms of like a company mule and a company cart, because I think that'd be really, really fun. It'd be an excellent impression to do. Just don't tell my wife.
That's fair. That is very, very
She
fair.
doesn't listen to this show, does she, Liam? She's got better things to do with her time, right?
Absolutely. I mean, she listens to me rattle on about this stuff all the time anyway. So doing it when we're not together is not high on her priority list.
I mean,
We should probably end each episode with a thank you to her for letting us exist, though.
I have to thank her every day because she is a wonderful, wonderful person.
It did strike me though that rather than a Napoleonic car, it would be like, surely, well, there are grades of this, aren't there? So there's what you're talking about a company wagon, and then there's sort of where my mind went, which was like a Royal Artillery train. So clearly, I've gone for the flashy option. But then there's probably like a middle ground, which is sort of horse and carriage, I guess.
I mean,
Um,
Napoleon's carriage was a major tourist attraction in London all the way up until the turn of the 20th century when Madame Tussauds burned to the ground. They ended up with about three of them by the end, but that first one, when it debuted in 1816, made William Bullock a fortune on and of itself.
I guess this
I'm sorry,
begs
did I just raise the tone?
you did. This was why
We don't do that in State of the Union.
Oh, apologies.
we don't do that in podcast period. Certainly not in State of the Union. Um, it does beg an important question though. And funnily enough, we were talking about this in the chat, weren't we? Not so long ago. Or was it just you and me that were talking about this, Luke?
It was you
Um,
and me, and I remember it specifically because I was thoroughly amused again with the whole like, council estate, upper, middle class posh boy. You misspelled Ferrari.
that's what it was. Yes, yes. I know all about my cars. I mean, it's slightly embarrassing for a Formula One fan to misspell Ferrari. Uh, whoops. Um, but we'll skate over that. I could make many Formula One jokes about Ferrari and strategies and many things, but we should keep it Napoleonic at the very least. But it did raise a question. Who what would you drive if you were a key figure from this period? And this was the argument that we were having, wasn't it, about whether or not Murat was an Aston Martin fan or a Bentley type of person. And I turned around and said, no, 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 no. Murat drives a Lamborghini. Like, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm. Look at a portrait of him in those breeches with the ostrich feather and tell me he does not drive the most ridiculous looking, bright orange, flame spitting out of the back Lamborghini. He just
No,
does.
unquestionably, Murat was a Countach man.
Gullwing doors,
Yep.
Yeah,
definitely.
I'm seeing that. But then this starts a rabbit hole, doesn't it? Which is what would the others have driven? Josh, let me get your takes on this.
I do agree with Murat. I can see the logic of the Lamborghini, not just because of the Italian connection, but also the flashiness. I mean, there's also you could say a few cars for Murat though. To be fair, do you not also think like I guess we've got to be careful what we say in case some of our listeners drive these cars now, but like a Jag maybe for Murat, there's a certain kind of performativity and of the aesthetic. It's a bit flashy, like a Lord Flashheart kind of vibes, do you think?
yes, that's a nice way of putting it. There is a certain joke that was done by Top Gear about the type of person who drives a Jaguar.
Excuse me, if you're going to reference Top Gear, it's not a Jaguar, it's a Jag.
It is indeed a
That was
Jag.
exactly what I was thinking of when I
Yeah,
said that.
this is a good indication of why we work together. We've got a very similar mind. And yes, it's sort of that sort of slightly caddish atmosphere of sort of you go to dinner with somebody and then you go, I'm awfully sorry. I don't seem to have my wallet on me. Would you mind sorting this out while I go and warm up the Jag? That kind of caddishness.
Which means, ironically, in the case of the Napoleonic Wars, that none of the British generals can drive a Jag because the British were the only ones who regularly paid for their supplies.
This is true. I reckon Messina would have been a Jag man.
I think that's a really good shout. I think that's a really good shout. The real question, actually, no, I want to hear the rest of Josh's thoughts on this before I come in on it. So,
I think Messina is a better suggestion. Another one I had, to be fair, another idea I've just had is Talleyrand. Do you think Talleyrand might have driven a Tesla? There's a certain kind of again, I want to be careful about who.
Marvin takes a breath across the studio for that one.
Yeah, like slight kind of going with the wind a little bit, riding with it. You get what I mean? Like there, he's not he's not as much interested in kind of the what you might think of Teslas for the environmental aspect as it is he is for like the show-offy nature of it, maybe. I mean, not all Tesla drivers are like that, of course, but that's the vibe. Perhaps Top Gear's imbued that into me as well. But I think Talleyrand might have driven a Tesla.
Sky Holland drove a Tesla with the license plate V12 Monster.
There is a point about that. There's a similar kind of joke about Jay Leno is responsible for this one about the Toyota Prius and how the Toyota Prius is a car that became quite popular in California because there's a certain type of American person who likes to demonstrate to the world the good work that they are doing anonymously. So they buy a Toyota Prius so that everybody knows that they are driving a Toyota Prius, and therefore they are buying the Toyota Prius for the benefit of the wider world and should therefore be respected and thanked because of it. And I'm therefore trying to work out who is the Prius driver of the Napoleonic Wars. This has turned into a very strange rabbit hole.
Devo.
Say that again, mate.
Devo.
Ah.
What makes you say that?
It's the competence, but it's the smugness of knowing that an entire empire is built on that confidence.
I can go along with that. I can go along with that. What do you think about Napoleon himself?
So I was thinking about one for Napoleon, just because obviously, the period's namesake. And I was sort of torn between like the US presidential, I think they call it the Beast, like that massive truck.
Yeah, the Beast.
Yeah, and or a Bugatti Veyron, because I think it's sort of a lot like him. It's sort of bigger than you think in real life. It was, it pushed boundaries of speed, in the way that he sort of pushed the boundaries of diplomacy and warfare. And yeah, everyone thinks it's Italian when it's actually French / German. Yeah, I think it sort of matches his personality quite well.
I can see that. I also want to give a little bit of a shout out to the McLaren F1, which is one of the few production sports cars in the world that has the seat in the center, which is exactly where Napoleon thinks he always should be.
It's true. Okay, one more. No, we're going to do two more. We'll do Wellington and Blucher because we just have to. Like, see, Blucher, your instinct would be he's going to buy a Mercedes because German. However, people don't call Blucher Marshal Vorwärts for nothing, right? So there's a part of me that thinks he would have something incredibly flashy and obviously incredibly fast.
Well, there's an answer to that. The Maybach.
Ooh,
See, I had a very similar train of thought, Zach, but I actually went with a souped up Mercedes G-Wagon with all the bells and whistles, because they are quick and it's all terrain. It is forwards. It's forwards at everything at full speed, and I really think that suits Blucher quite well.
It's got the industriousness.
Yeah,
G-Wagon.
It's either a souped up G-Wagon or it's one of their 6-wheel saloon cars they made in the 30s.
It's one of those. It's absolutely one of those. Okay, what about Wellington though? Because we need something flashy yet dependable, but not too ostentatious, but ostentatious enough that everybody knows that he's sort of a fashionista. This is a
Land Rover.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well played. Yes.
It's got to be like the Discovery Sport with, again, all the bells and whistles, and probably armored as well.
Yeah, but it's also got like the full shooting brake set in the back with the custom matched shotguns and the bar.
Yeah. Yeah. He just pulls up at the hunt and gets himself a cold glass of bubbles out the boot.
Absolutely.
If you're just tuning in to the Napoleonic Wars podcast, don't despair. There is a sort of a point to all of this. So yeah, that's what would Napoleonic figures. How did we get into this rabbit hole? What would Napoleonic figures have driven when it came to modern day supercars? This is the Napoleonic Wars podcast, bringing you all of the must answer questions relating to the period.
I was going to say, I feel like this is the the cutting edge history which people might tune into the State of the Union to listen to if anyone is indeed still listening at this point. We probably would you not think though, gents, we do have a cursory obligation at least to deliver some quote unquote real history, maybe the kind that that we aim to repackage through popular history. Not that the Napoleonic cars debate is not very important in the grand scheme of historiography.
What is this madness that young Mr. Redden, the Provost Marshal, has just uttered here, trying to bring us on topic? Have you not learnt from previous states of the Union? The Beau Reynolds has attempted many times and failed comprehensively to bring me back on topic. But you do actually make a pretty good point. I mean, it's ironic, right, that the person who's bringing us back in line is the youngest member of our team, the one who hasn't completed university training, and yet he's sort of turning around to well, a research fellow and an assistant professor and a reenactor and saying, look, can we actually like do actual history stuff?
It's a
He's
novel
living up
thought,
to the name.
certainly.
This is a turn up for the books. Okay, so in the interests of talking about actual history, what have we got, gents? What have we noticed in the last little while?
So now that we've been thoroughly reprimanded by Josh to get back to something a little more on trend, I've been reading Alex Mukabritz's Napoleonic Wars: A Global History, which is a fascinating book. And there are a ton of characters in there that I think I want to do a bit more research about, but also that I think would either make a really, really cool film or just deserve to be sort of talked about. And a guy that I have come across, and I don't know if you guys have heard of him, I'm sure you will have, is Jorgen Jorgensen from originally from Denmark. Does that name ring a bell to anyone?
This isn't the guy who succeeds in assassinating Spencer Percival, is it?
He is not. He is not. So he's born in 1790 in Copenhagen, left school at 15 and was apprenticed on an English collier, a coal ship, and sort of travels the world doing that and gets around to the Pacific, Australasia, all over. He finds himself back in Copenhagen in 1807, and now we all know what's about to happen, and he witnesses the British bombardment. And of course, that massively is a proud day, and that massively pisses him off, right? So then he enlists in the Danish Navy as a privateer, and he's so good at it. He brings back like very, very quickly brings back a lot of shipping back to Copenhagen. But he comes unstuck when he comes across HMS, I think it's Sappho, off the coast of the northeast of England, actually. And he's captured by the British, and they parole him as an officer. He then escapes, it's absolutely fascinating character. He ends up the protector of Iceland for a while. So when the British first start trading with Iceland, obviously they're still sort of technically at war with Denmark, and Denmark owns Iceland at the time, sort of protectorate. And he basically, this guy Jorgen Jorgensen, basically takes over and starts instituting a load of like Jacobin policies and reforms in Iceland. And then the Royal Navy turn up and say, no, we're not having that. And then they arrest him again. And he goes back to London, and he's got a gambling addiction and an alcohol addiction. And it's just a fascinating guy.
Okay, so cool stories of individuals from the Napoleonic era. So I'm going to come in with one here, and I'm taking this from a PhD because standard. And it's not so much a cool individual, but I just respect the hustle here. And I guess this is kind of a story of how time in the archive can be rewarded in obscure ways. So in the National Archives, there are these ledgers of expenses for the Judge Advocate General's Department. And by and large, when researchers go into archives, they either do one of two things. They either scoop up everything that they can possibly find for use another day and take photographs of everything, because these days you can just basically digitize it yourself and then take it away, having got through literally months of material in a matter of hours. Or you go looking for very specific things. And I was doing the former of those. So I kind of thought nothing of it, just snapped away, got the photos I needed. But I did notice this one guy who was mentioned, a Daniel Sutton, who for the financial year 1808 to 9 was paid £305 for the services that he gave to the department. Now that's a lot of money. In modern speak, that's maybe £16,000. It's about a quarter of the budget of the department for that year. So you would think that this guy was, somebody of significance. So I kind of tucked it away at the back of my head. Didn't think much of it other than that's a lot of money. And then months later, I was reading the letters of the clerks for the Judge Advocate General's department when up pops our Mr. Sutton. And I'm just going to read you the section of my thesis that describes what happened. In December 1809, within 2 months of taking office, Manners Sutton wrote to Lieutenant General Loftus, acknowledging Daniel Sutton's, no relation, neglect of duty as Deputy Judge Advocate, and assuring the General that he would write to him. Manners Sutton duly did this 4 days later, though on this occasion he took pains to assure Sutton that he was not being formally reprimanded. In February 1810, however, Sutton again came to the attention of the JAG for grossly overcharging for expenses while acting as Deputy Judge Advocate, something which may explain the extraordinary sum that was paid to him in 1808. By March 1811, however, Sutton was again failing to meet expectations, with John Oldham, Deputy Judge Advocate General and First Clerk for the JAG Department, sending a curt letter on behalf of the JAG, demanding detailed explanations for delays and failings in court procedures, whilst reproaching him for failing to pay attention to his earlier warnings on fulfilling his duties. In June, Oldham had to write again, seeking an explanation as to why the revisions of the proceedings that had been corrected by the Commander-in-Chief for the courts to carry out had not been adhered to, and demanding to know what, quote, you thought it your duty to suggest to the court as to the course which they were called upon to pursue on this occasion. After Sutton was paid for his services in those trials, he never again appears to have officiated as a Deputy Judge Advocate. So as I say, not so much a cool individual, but just a hilarious case of incompetence and the government wasting money, contracting individuals who seemingly are completely incapable of delivering the necessary services. So it's nice to see how much has changed in 200 years.
I love Easter eggs like that. I mean, that's something you would have found had you not been in contact with those two specific things. It's the beauty of being a historian, I guess, and doing a PhD when you get to kind of encounter two things that just piece together and give you a little illumination of a part of history that would never ever be found otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing is, I can't find much more on him. Like there isn't. I don't have lists of who made
That's
it
all
to
we
the bar. So I'm not sure many people have written about Daniel Sutton. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's actually a really famous con artist that I never knew about. If anybody's got any thoughts, then hey, get in touch and let me know. But if I put that in the book, that's how Daniel Sutton is going down in history. And he probably wouldn't thank me for it either.
Yeah, definitely. I've got to say, I love both of those stories, both Jürgen Jürgensen and Daniel Sutton. However, my one is a little bit, I say that's the beauty of history. Everyone we come up with is different. Mine relates to an essay I wrote earlier this year when I did a deep dive on something. And well, I'm interested to see if any of you know who this guy is. If any of you do, it might be Luke. Luke, do you know who Charles Hinksman is? Does that ring a bell?
The name rings a very slight bell, but I could not tell you why.
I think you might kick yourself because of your specialism and everything. Because Charles Hinksman is the name of the photographer to whom the photograph "Last Survivors of Waterloo" is attributed.
Okay, yes.
Yes, and he, in many ways, he's a pretty inconspicuous fellow. He was a clerk to the War Office, and we don't know that much about him, so much to the extent that the photograph is ultimately only attributed to him. So we can't say with with much confidence that he did actually take it. I should say that if the listeners aren't familiar with the Last Survivors of Waterloo photograph, it's relatively famous, but it's a picture of in 1880, I think, of like Chelsea pensioners sitting down 65 years after the Battle of Waterloo, all very elderly men. And it's a great photograph just because of how anachronistic it is. The fact that you have a picture, we don't associate photography at all with the Napoleonic Wars, but we have a photograph almost as a Napoleonic source, which I think is fascinating. And so Charles John Hinksman, who wasn't alive in the Napoleonic Wars, in that way is a Napoleonic figure. And the reason I'm identifying him as an interesting figure is because I think I did a little bit of diving onto his family history, and I saw that he was related to to several officers who'd served in like the Indian Mutiny and also in the Anglo-Afghan and Anglo-Sikh wars. So without any certainty, you can see that he has military connections. He has an interest in military history. And in 1880, he took a photograph that became essential to the memory of Waterloo, or a really important kind of artifact almost in that battle's memory. And it's interesting to interrogate the idea of why that photograph was taken, I think. And it's my theory that he was engaged in this act of military commemoration in the context of 1880 and what was going on, and the renewed wave of new imperialism in Britain. And Hinksman was kind of in the context of his family and his occupation in the War Office, wanted to take a picture of that, almost however offhand he took that photograph, as a kind of a way of nodding back to Waterloo and the role that battle played as a touchstone, or like a launch pad for British imperialism in the 19th century, and how essential, as Luke will tell you, Waterloo became in British imperial identity in the 19th century. And Charles Hinksman, someone you otherwise wouldn't have heard of, he's a kind of second generation remember of Waterloo. He's detached from it. He wasn't around for the battle, but even he was engaged in that act of memory and commemorating it, and recognizing that in the context of 1880 and the wars that Britain was engaged with at that time, Waterloo was actually really important.
I think we might have to strip Luke of his title, Doctor Memory. I mean, all of your awards, your associate professorship, your book, it's all meaningless now because you didn't know who that one individual was, and we won't let you forget that on this show, Luke.
That is very, very fair. If I can win back, I have my chap, but if I can win back just a hair of respect with my favorite version of what Zack and Josh both highlighted as sort of the things you only find if you're reading those particular sources. This is a sentence or two from the introduction of my book. In the days before the opening of Waterloo Bridge on the 18th of June, 1817, the national press breathlessly reported that Wellington's favorite charger, Copenhagen, had been shipped to London before his master in preparation for the opening ceremony. In fact, Waterloo Bridge's aquatics opening procession had no place for Wellington's horse. Copenhagen had been shipped home so that Sir Thomas Lawrence could see the horse put through its paces at Astley's Royal Amphitheatre before painting him for the 1818 portrait of the Duke of Wellington in the dress that he wore and on the horse he rode at the Battle of Waterloo. I'm not sure how many people have read the right number of sources to put that slew of dates together. But I remember when I realized, because I read all these stuff about Copenhagen, I'm like, then I read the reports, and I'm like, there's no horse mentioned in this. They took a boat. This isn't going to work. What's Copenhagen? Oh, okay. So yeah, very much on that sort of slew of memory, and actually ties in very neatly to my fellow. Now, this is someone that anyone if you have ever been to a circus in the United Kingdom, you have a certain direct connection with, because he is traditionally credited with creating the correct and standard size of the circus ring. Meet Philip Astley, a retired sergeant major in the 15th, or the King's Regiment of Light Dragoons, who had served in the 7 Years' War from 56 to 63. He drew his first troop of his fellow cavalry veterans together to create a performance troupe from both sides of the conflict. He had the French, he had the British, he had the Prussians, Austrians, all of that. The troupe debuted in 1768, performing various feats of trick horsemanship in an open field in Lambeth, that most glamorous of performance locations. These demonstrations proved successful enough that in 1769, Astley's bought a piece of land just to the southwest of Westminster Bridge. It is now just to the west of where the National Theatre is in London, if you know your South Bank. That piece of land would, for over a century, hold 4 different amphitheaters graced with his name. This is the man who founded Astley's Royal Amphitheatre. In 1770, when it opened in that space for the first time, there was no indication that the endeavor would be so long-lived. He employed the space for trick riding performances at night and for riding lessons during the day, slowly investing the profits back into the land, raising spectator stands, roofing them, and then finally, in the 1778-1779 winter off-season, roofing the entire structure with wood salvaged/stolen from an abandoned local hustings. He continued improving the space into the 80s and really drove both him and then his son and his successors to make his amphitheater London's premier location for equestrian entertainment. And the ring in there is the standard circus size to the UK this day. And the stage that was attached to it was, over the course of it, there were 4 amphitheaters. At some point, the largest in London.
Yeah, I thought all of that was down to Hugh Jackman. Not gonna lie. That's a Greatest Showman reference for people who don't know what I'm on about.
Yeah, no, he just wore a fancy coat. P.T. Barnum actually has a fascinating connection to Waterloo. He visited on a European tour, and his couple of sentences on it in his autobiography are fascinating because it's truly glorious to see the souvenir sellers of the battlefield through the eyes of someone who was a consummate showman and professional swindler.
Spot the theatre historian in the room with that one. Blimey. It's a bit like I'm having kind of flashbacks to when my non-Napoleonic history friends sort of turned around to me and said, you can't make everything about the Peninsular War, Zack. I was like, watch me, because I absolutely can. And it seems that Luke can absolutely make everything about theatre history, which, granted, that is kind of what you're working on, I think, right now. Because you're doing a thing on hippodramas, aren't you?
I am indeed, and in fact, what I just said was loosely read from the introduction of that piece. I am just finished, actually. It's with an editor. I will not say at what press or anything like that. A source book on the Battle of Waterloo hippodrama. This is J.H. Amherst's spectacle from 1824, first performed at Astley's Royal Amphitheatre, although at that point, for that one very brief year, it was known as Davis's Royal Amphitheatre, under the direction of Andrew Ducrot, who is another person I will be doing a pod bite on. Fascinating fellow. And yes, Zach.
Can I ask a really simple question here?
Sure.
What the heck is a hippodrama?
A hippodrama is horse theater. It is literally theatrical performances that include trick riding and equestrian spectacle and actors. And while there is a running old joke in Hollywood, there's an old saw that you never work with children or animals. We have records of the amphitheater and a few others basically saying, listen, our 4-legged actors are much easier to deal with than our two-legged actors. They don't give a damn about their billing order. All they want is a bucket of oats and a good rub down. Although there are plenty of two-legged actors who wouldn't mind a good rub down either. I will freely admit this.
And this is a hippodrama about Waterloo.
It is indeed. It is a
That sounds
three-act.
sick.
It is pretty fantastic. It's the script is utterly bonkers. I first encountered it when I was researching my dissertation, and I sort of read this thing and sort of going, wait, they did this on stage? It's nuts. Actually, Liam, this is something you'll appreciate as someone who has done the correct training in, as I remember you calling it at Waterloo Live, binning it off a horse. But Ducrot played the Duke of Brunswick, and the finale of Act Two, the emotional finale of Act Two, was his death at Quatre Bras. And every night, Ducrot, without fail, safely and dramatically died and fell off a galloping horse.
Wow. I mean, that's bold. And like you say, I can only assume that there were a lot of veterans involved in the production of that. And I wonder actually where their horsepower came from, because it's obviously horsepower was king at the time, but it's still fairly niche to have horses trained in military equitation, but not doing military equitation, if that makes sense.
It does. It absolutely does. I really do think it was one of these cases, actually akin to military equitation, where the men and their mounts were sort of trained together as a unit, and sort of grew up almost together.
I wonder, and it springs to mind. I wonder in their sort of records for these hippodramas, if there's any evidence of serving soldiers sort of moonlighting. I can imagine the guys from Hyde Park Barracks, as was in Knightsbridge, sort of sneaking out with a couple of mounts to go down and earn a few bob at the hippodrama.
I don't have any records of serving officers. There are certainly the Battle of Waterloo hippodrama in particular was advertised, especially at the beginning, as sort of all the military maneuvers were performed by picked Waterloo men. So they're absolutely veterans. That may have included some active service. Where I do have evidence of active service, people participating in this, however, is in the colonies. There was a big military show in Hobart in Tasmania, where after the military play, the entire garrison showed up on stage to do military maneuvers.
I mean, that is a huge amount of people, right? Like,
it's a significant number.
Yeah.
Is this a Waterloo Live idea for next year?
We can only hope. But I mean,
sorry, I want to hear more about the script though. I mean, like, I don't want to preempt your project or anything, but like, how the hell did they organize this, and how many people were involved?
It's got a pretty big cast. It's got a pretty large cast. It's hard to tell because the only distinctive cast lists we have are for the named characters, right? So there's just sort of a chorus of soldiers and peasants and things like that. But what makes it actually really remarkable in 1824, especially given we were talking about, is sort of like the British imperial project in Waterloo and all of that, is that the entire first act of this doesn't feature a single British soldier. The entire first act is entirely French and Prussian. It's the Prussians and then the French. Its climax is the French taking of the bridge at Marchienne. Second act features Prussians, British, and French, culminates at Quatre Bras, although they tweak Quatre Bras so that the Prussians arrive to help. And then the final is, of course, Waterloo, which also, of course, has Prussians and all of that. It's a remarkably even-handed nationalistic spectacle in this. And it's got sort of all the trappings, and it's this massive hit. It runs the entire 1824 season, 144 consecutive episodes, performances, evenings, and continues to be revived year after year.
It sounds better than Ridley Scott's version of Waterloo, to be honest, in terms of like the representation of events.
Certainly
Well
more
said,
accurate.
Josh. Well said, Josh. I have clearly trained you well.
But I watched the film.
In Luke, with the participants, are they performing in French and German and English, or is it all in English?
All of the dialogue is in English.
Right.
And sort of it's one of those classic uniforms and to a certain extent accents let you
Right.
tell them apart. Although honestly, really the only people with accents, there's a comedic character named Monsieur Maladroit, and who is written for Amherst, the guy who wrote the play, clearly more comfortable on his feet than horseback, and he speaks with a comedy French accent. But the rest of them are actually pretty, like, it's pretty down to earth and respectful.
Wow. And are those three acts performed in one sitting, or is that over a 3 nights, or how long does it last?
It's one sitting. It's not the length of, I would estimate it at maybe an hour total, maybe an hour and a half, because it was always done with other stuff as well as at the Hippodrama. It could be an opener, it could be a closer. It's never the only thing on the bill. So it's of that old school performance that we're not used to anymore, right? You know, you talk to our grandparents and they tell you about when we went to the cinema, there was a newsreel and a cartoon and things like that, and that was how media was consumed. It's of that style.
Man, I wish I had a time machine. That sounds awesome.
Right? Yeah. The closest we can get is the last adaptation of it, or sort of the most popular adaptation of it. It was remade in juvenile drama, which are 2-inch paper figures drawn by leading artists and sold in sheets so that people could collect them, and in theory, children could reproduce the play at home. And we have these sheets. There's some in the British Museum. You can get the Pollock Toy Theater versions to this day on eBay. And I'm hoping, thanks to the kindness of, speaking of Alexander Nikabridze, and the James Smith Knoll collection down at the University of Louisiana Shreveport, I'm hoping that a full set of these illustrations in color will be in this Hippodrama source book if it ever gets off the ground.
I mean, that's like an early version of Airfix, isn't it? Sorry
It really is.
I mean, Josh, congratulations for seriously raising the tone of this conversation and bringing us back on track. But I am now going to proceed to lower it as we work towards our conclusion. But that is basically like your early concept. I admittedly, I don't know enough about toy history. I know there is a whole kind of area of study about toy history, and Luke, you would know when sort of the first inverted commas toys of specifically about Waterloo get produced. But I mean, I'm very conscious of that story of the Brontes, when the Bronte sisters, living in the parsonage at this point, their father Patrick comes home with a box of toy soldiers, and immediately, I don't think their brother Branwell gets much of a look in, because the girls bundle in, and one of them, I forget who it is, seizes one of them and goes, "This is the Duke of Wellington." So you've got sort of a non-specific kind of building up of, look, here's a soldier, and we can recreate events from Napoleonic history off of that. But this sounds like it must be one of the earlier versions of, here is a dedicated toy specifically so that you can act out Waterloo from the comfort of your own. I'm not sure people really had sitting rooms at that point in time unless they were incredibly wealthy, but you know what I mean.
I do indeed. Yeah, and actually at the time, for the average person, toy soldiers would have been paper. Yeah.
Oh, really? Not
Yes,
like
they
the
would
wooden
have.
figures.
Wood at that level is very hard to carve. It's quite expensive, and tin would have been the logical one. And there were some sort of slightly 3D, mostly flat tin figures that were very popular in Germany. But paper print is inherently cheaper. And so it was, sort of hugely popular. And in fact, if you read some of the juvenile drama versions of this. There was one by a guy named Green and one by a guy named Skelt that came out in the 1840s. Both of them, either at the beginning or the end of their playbooks, note that you can supplement the battle scenes with their collections of toy soldier, their paper soldiers, also available for sale at their shops.
Funnily enough, I think Hellion are basically doing an equivalent now. They have like these little books of paper figures that you can just kind of cut out and create your own little battalions out of. We're not being sponsored by Hellion. More's the pity, because then I could pay these guys some more. But yeah, that's interesting to know where the tradition comes from.
Yeah, I've seen those Hellion ones, and I don't know if such a academic or such research exists, but that conversation just got me thinking about like the toy history of the Napoleonic Wars, and how important toys have been in terms of like remembering that period. I mean, I'd wager that out of all of us, to some extent, toys have actually played a big role in like making us interested in the period in the first place. Like maybe for me, it was like digital to an extent with like Total War or whatever. Although to be fair, I did have the Avalon War and Peace from my dad. But yes, toys must be so important in terms of the way like the Napoleonic Wars are perceived nowadays, and why so many listeners will have an interest in it. So there's something to be said there. Potential
Well, straight
episode.
away within that, you get a discussion about who's the good guy, who do I want to be, because that's how kids think, right? Who I want to be the goodie, and then the other person can be the baddie. And so immediately, as soon as you decide upon who is your goodie, you start to cement that kind of identification process of Napoleon is either the good guy or Napoleon is the bad guy. And that then feeds through into, the creation of perception. And because people have that perception, you then get into that whole thing that historians are always banging on about, which is bias and confirmation bias, and trying to sort of unclip those biases or biases, whatever the correct pronunciation is, into how you kind of reappraise the history and the period. And of course, if you consume something that's a bit kind of nationalistic in its outlook, that will help to reaffirm your stance quite possibly. It's almost like kind of reading the Ladybird book. Do you know what I mean? I can't
Absolutely.
remember the Ladybird book on Napoleon. I remember the Ladybird book on Cromwell, and it was pretty integral to me thinking initially that Charles I was an absolute moron, which, he had his moments. But it was only much later that I realized that Cromwell was basically the Napoleon of the 17th century. That's my history hot take.
One fascinating thing about this, the last ever adaptation of this, it was passed down, it was reprinted over and over again in juvenile drama form. And in the 1970s, a chap named Eric Underwood took it on himself to rewrite it, because it had gotten to the point where it makes perfect sense to me, but I've been steeped in it for so long, and I think someone coming in new makes it like, what on earth is going on here? Because it had been abridged and cut and abridged and cut. So he decided to take the figurines and the characters and basically write an entirely new drama set at Waterloo about it. So we have a version written in 1824 and adapted in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s. And we have a version written in 1970, 1970 even. I will give you all one guess. Which version is more virulently Francophobic?
It's got to be the 1970s one, right?
Dead on, Liam. Absolutely dead on.
I think like Josh was saying, I think it's really interesting how that can play into nationalism and how that develops. I think when you're commemorating an event so close, did you say 1824? It was
Yep. First written.
And there's a lot of people still around, and I think there's still a fairly sort of chivalrous respect between combatants at that level. and countries at that level. But by the time you get to the 70s, the political picture has changed exponentially in many ways, you know.
You're absolutely right, and it's my pet theory. I don't have the lists to back this, but it's my pet theory that one of the reasons that the 1824 version may have been so generous is that it was about to be performed by cavalry troops basically from all sides, right? You know, they were drawing the best riders from three countries at that point, and you don't want to piss off your riders. Ducrot cut his teeth touring Europe. So I think there's a built-in respect there for the level of talent and all of that. And also there is, of course, at that same time, right, Britain is still building up its reputation. And there's no in order for Waterloo to mean something, the French have to be a threat, which means they have to be great soldiers, which means all of that. So there is absolutely that part of it. Although I will say it's actually quite respectful of Napoleon. Although it does tip its hat to his completely accurate, brilliant understanding of propaganda. And I don't think even the most rabidly Bonapartist people will argue with me saying that the man was a propagandistic genius. I just find it says something so beautifully about 20th century Britain that the version written less than a decade after the Battle of Waterloo um, is more generous to both the French and the Emperor than the one written the same year that Britain entered into negotiations to join the EEC.
Yep, guilty as charged. There was a book that came out a few years ago, wasn't there, called A Thousand Years of Annoying the French. It's a trope that we enjoy playing on. And it's curious that that's only, what, 26 years after, 25 years rather, after the conclusion of World War II. And yet, you know, that inclination towards Francophobia just seems to be there. It's a thing that I don't know if we still reach for it, but certainly there is a generation that does sort of do the whole cheese-eating surrender monkey cliche. And there you have it kind of played out. So we've actually had a State of the Union that, apart from the nonsense at the start, which basically involved me talking, has actually been interesting and educational, and I've learned something. Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this new style of service, which seems to be more competent and more driven and generally kind of improved. Do remember what I said about the perks. They will kick off from early September, so you will have plenty of time to get yourself signed up. If you are one of the patrons already, don't worry, I'm not about to push the button immediately. There will be a warning time, and any changeover won't happen until the second half of August. You'll get plenty of alerts, plenty of reminders, so that you can choose your perk tiers accordingly. But until then, I've been Zack White.
I'm Josh Redden.
I'm Liam Telfer.
And I'm Luke Reynolds.
Folks, thank you so much for your time, both guests / co-hosts and listeners. Stay well, my friends. Stay safe. And as always, thank you for listening. Hello again, folks. Please remember, we're still fighting back from that Spotify nightmare. So please do 2 really simple and quick things to help us rise from the ashes. First, whack that subscribe button, especially if you're listening to this on Spotify, because you're likely to have been disconnected. But whatever platform you listen to your podcasts on, please just do it anyway to make sure you can stay connected to us. Second, like and leave a comment. It helps bump us up the algorithm to reconnect with our lost audience. If you're a fan of the show, you can leave a 5-star review. Go on, you know you want to. And did you know that you can now join a mailing list to get regular updates on all the news about newly released episodes, meetups for patrons, new lines of merch that have dropped, and all the hot gossip about what's coming soon? Because let's be honest, this show is all about the hot gossip. To sign up, go to www.thenapoleonicwars.net. Much love to all my Patreon supporters who are enjoying a rejuvenated and revitalized offering of perks on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/the Napoleonic Wars pod to find out how you can join a buzzing community of like-minded Napoleonic nerds who are enjoying things like courses, socials, a book club, green room access to recordings, early releases, exclusive episodes, and much more. Shout outs to our patrons who, at the time of recording this in mid-August 2024, are in the mentioned and dispatches tier: Rob Griffith, Brendan Teeling, Beatrice DeGraff, Lynn Dawson, Jamie Kingston, Lucy Tatner, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Stephen Colson, Jim Getz, Stephen Gillen, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Anscombe, Rob Coughlin, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Mark Trowbridge, Mars Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramas, Anthony Gumbau, Anonymous American, Martin Pisani, James Fluick, Natasha Hobday, Rod Schrager, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, David Graylick, Ted Andrews, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Carol Dixon Smith, Roland Shark, Giovanni, Jean-Baptiste Merlon, and Darla Vincent. And the Admirals: John Haynes, Ryan Diamond, JC Kaiser, Bob Burnham, Mike Guest, Liam Telfer, Todd and Laird Campbell, Rachel Stark, Mark Duckers, David Maxwell, David Priest, Graham Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashworth, Dan Hazelwood, Kate Walcombe, Clemens Beman, Charles McKay, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, Tim Day, Mark Chestnut, Jason Morn, and the enigmatically named Zed. And I promise that's not just me boosting the numbers. We'll be back very soon, but until then, this has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. On behalf of myself, Liam, Luke, and Josh, take care of yourselves, folks. Stay well. And as always, thank you for listening.